A random lawyer called saying I inherited property. I never expected a hidden farm with dark secrets. You ever get a phone call that feels wrong? Not just unexpected, I mean the kind where the voice on the other end makes your skin crawl before you even register the words. That's how mine started. It was a Tuesday afternoon, sometime past 3. I was half asleep on the couch after a crappy day at work when my phone lit up with an unknown caller notification. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but for some reason, maybe the way it rang, sharp and insistent, I picked up. The voice was male, calm, deliberate, but there was this faint echo, like he was calling from a deep, empty room or somewhere underground. Is this Nathan Cole? He paused in weird places, stretching out the syllables like he was tasting them. Yeah. I sat up, instantly uneasy. Mr. Cole, my name is Daniel Harrow. I'm an attorney. I represent the estate of your great uncle, Thomas Mather. I froze. I didn't have a great uncle Thomas. Hell, the Mather name didn't even sound familiar. You might have the wrong number, I said. No, Nathan. His voice dropped lower. You are the sole surviving heir. I'm calling to inform you that you have inherited property, a farm, to be precise, in Blackwood County. I almost laughed. It sounded like a scam, the kind where some prince wants to wire you millions if you just hand over your banking info. But then he rattled off my full date of birth, my current address, the middle name no one ever uses. That stopped me cold. How did you... It is my job to know these things. Another pause. I swear I heard a faint scratching sound through the line, like fingernails on wood. The property is remote, abandoned for some years, but it is yours now, by law. I told him I wasn't interested, but he insisted on giving me the address anyway. I wrote it down without really meaning to. Before hanging up, he said something that made the back of my neck prickle. Nathan, once you arrive, you may hear things. Pay them no mind. The land remembers its own. Click, call ended. I should have thrown the paper away right then. Should have ignored the whole thing, but curiosity is a hell of a drug. And the more I thought about it, the more I needed to see this inherited farm for myself. 2 days later, I was driving out to Blackwood County. The further I got from the highway, the more wrong the world felt. The road narrowed into cracked asphalt, then to gravel. Houses thinned out until there was nothing but skeletal trees and fields of brown grass whipping in the wind. I stopped for gas at this rusted, half-collapsed station about 20 miles from the address. Inside, the air reeked of mildew. The cashier, an old man with skin like crumpled paper, looked up when I asked for directions to Mather Farm. The color drained from his face. You don't want to go there, boy. I laughed nervously. Why not? His eyes darted to the dusty window, toward the empty road. 'Cause you'll hear them. I asked who them was, but he just shook his head and rang up my water bottle without another word. When I finally pulled into the dirt driveway, the place looked worse than I imagined. The farmhouse sat hunched in the middle of dead fields, its roof sagging like a broken spine. Windows stared out, cracked and dust-caked like blind eyes. The paint had peeled so badly it looked like the wood was flaying itself. The fields were just wrong. No crops, no weeds, just brittle stalks of something long dead poking up from black, dry soil. It felt like nothing had grown here in years, like nothing could. Even the air felt heavier. Inside, the smell hit me, first a mix of dust, mold, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood. The floorboards groaned under my boots. Most of the furniture was still there, but covered in sheets that sagged under decades of dust. Flies buzzed lazily in the corners, but I didn't see any signs of rodents or birds. The silence was oppressive, the kind that presses in on you until you can hear your own heartbeat. I dumped my duffel bag in what must have been the living room, unrolled my sleeping bag on an old couch, and tried to convince myself I'd just stay one night. The first noise came around 11 p.m. I'd been lying there in the dark, scrolling on my phone, when I heard a faint scritch, scritch, scritch inside the wall behind me. At first I figured it was mice, but then it moved slow, deliberate, like something was dragging its nails along the inside of the plaster. It started near the floor, then climbed up and up until it was right behind my head. I sat up, heart hammering. The scratching stopped. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps on the porch outside. Not the quick scurry of an animal. These were heavy, human. 1 step, 2, 3. They circled the porch slowly, the boards creaking under the weight. I didn't dare move. My phone screen dimmed, plunging me into complete darkness. I just sat there, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped outside the front door. I swear I could hear someone breathing. And then, a single deliberate knock. I barely slept that first night. Not after the knock. Not after those slow, deliberate footsteps faded into the distance. Every creak of the old house made me flinch. Every gust of wind scraping against the siding sounded like fingers. When morning finally came, I was grateful for the daylight, but even in the sun, the place didn't feel safe. I decided to explore the property. Part of me wanted to see what I'd inherited. The other part wanted to make sure no one was lurking around. The first stop was the barn. It sat maybe 50 yards from the house. Its red paint faded to a dull rust color. The huge wooden doors were secured with a thick, old-fashioned padlock, the kind you'd see in movies about haunted prisons. But what made my stomach twist were the marks on the inside of the door, long, deep gouges that splintered the wood. Not scratches from an animal. These were intentional, each line parallel, like something or someone had been dragged across the surface while clawing to get out. I ran my fingers over one groove. The wood was rough and splintered, and when I pulled my hand back, there was a dark residue under my nails. Dried something. Next, I wandered to the well. It was made of old stone, crumbling in places, with a rotting wooden cover tied down by frayed rope. The smell hit me before I even got close. Rot, thick and wet like meat left out in the sun. Flies buzzed lazily over the gaps in the cover, slipping inside. I leaned over and peered through one of the cracks. It was dark, the kind of black that swallows light, but somewhere deep below I thought I saw movement, a slow ripple, like something shifting in the water. The smell made my eyes water, so I backed away quickly. The wood started just beyond the fields, maybe 100 yards out. At first I thought the trees looked normal, but the closer I got, the more I noticed it. Every trunk leaned slightly toward the farmhouse, not bent by wind, not growing toward sunlight. It was like they were leaning in to listen. I didn't go further. Back in the house, I started poking around the rooms. Most were empty except for old, sheet-covered furniture. In the hallway upstairs, I found a framed family portrait hanging crooked on the wall. Every single face in it had been scratched out, gouged so deep into the photograph that the paper had torn. Every face, except one. In the far background, almost hidden in shadow, was a blurred figure standing between two trees. They weren't part of the family. Their face wasn't scratched out, but their head was tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle, and they were staring directly at the camera. I put the picture face down on a table. That night, I woke up to a sound. At first, it was faint, a low murmur, like a radio left on in another room. I thought maybe I'd left my phone playing something, but then I realized the sound was coming from the pantry. It was whispering. I couldn't make out words, just a steady stream of breathy voices overlapping, like a dozen people talking at once. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the pantry door. My hand shook as I turned the knob. The whispers stopped instantly. The pantry was empty, shelves lined with dusty cans and jars, the floor covered in a thin layer of dirt. That's when I noticed the back shelf didn't quite touch the wall. There was a gap, maybe a couple of inches. I pushed the shelf aside and found a wooden trapdoor. When I opened it, a wave of air hit me cold enough to make my breath fog instantly. It didn't smell like the rest of the house. It smelled sterile, dead. The ladder creaked as I climbed down into the cellar. The light from my flashlight bounced off glass. Shelves lined the walls, covered in jars. When I got closer, my stomach twisted. Inside the jars were eyes, dozens of them. Some cloudy and pale, others so fresh they still had threads of muscle and nerve dangling from the back. The brine they floated in was thick, yellowish, with bits of sediment swirling lazily whenever I moved a jar. I stumbled back, gagging, nearly knocking one off the shelf. In the far corner, half buried under a pile of old rags, was a leather-bound book. The cover was warped, the edges stained dark with something sticky. When I opened it, the pages crackled like dry leaves. Most were filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. Not the careful, tidy script of a ledger, but frantic scrawls that slanted more and more the deeper I flipped. I only caught glimpses of the words. They're watching, the harvest, the bargain must be kept. And one line, underlined 3 times, that made my skin crawl. Don't look in the well after dark. I spent the next morning hunched over the kitchen table with that journal. The sun was out, but it didn't help. The whole time I read, I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a face peering in. The first few entries were boring enough: dates, weather conditions, notes about crops and livestock. The handwriting was neat, measured. Then, around the halfway mark, the tone shifted. The handwriting slanted, ink smudged like it had been written in a hurry. Sentences became fragments. The content wasn't about farming anymore. June 3rd. The watchers came last night. I heard them in the trees. The cows wouldn't stop screaming. Had to give them one. June 10th. The earth won't take the seed unless they are fed. July 1st. I told them I couldn't keep doing this. They whispered back, you will. August 14th. They stand just past the fence line, waiting, always waiting. My stomach turned as I read. Some entries were just drawings, circles of stick figures around a black smear, lines radiating outward like roots or veins. The most recent pages were barely legible, words slashed into the paper. The harvest is the life is the bargain. That afternoon, I decided to head into town, hoping maybe someone could tell me what the hell my great uncle had been talking about. They didn't want to talk. People would glance at me, then quickly look away, Conversation stopped when I walked into the diner. Only one person spoke to me. A frail old woman sitting alone near the window. Her eyes were pale blue, almost cloudy, but sharp in a way that made me feel like she could see straight through me. "You're from the farm," she said, not asking. I nodded cautiously. "Yeah, Mather Farm. Did you know my—" "Don't look out the window after dark," she cut in, her voice a rasp. "Excuse me?" "They'll know you see them," she whispered, leaning in, "and then they'll come closer." Before I could ask more, she stood and shuffled out, leaving her coffee half finished. That night, I made the mistake. I wasn't trying to. I'd been lying on the couch, scrolling my phone, trying to ignore the way the house seemed to settle louder at night. But something caught my eye through the side window movement in the tree line. At first, I thought it was just wind. The trees swayed slightly, but one shape wasn't moving like the rest. It was tall, thin. Its arms hung too low, almost to its knees. And even from here, I could tell its head was tilted, just like the blurred figure in that scratched-out photograph. I froze. It didn't move closer, but I swear I could feel it watching me. My chest tightened. Then, and I'm not proud of this, I ducked down behind the couch like a terrified kid. When I finally peeked again, it was gone. The wind picked up around midnight, rattling the siding. I heard the barn groan, its old boards creaking under the strain. Then it wasn't just creaking, it was rattling. The padlocked doors clattered against their hinges, not in a random gust, but steady bursts like something inside was throwing itself at them. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped onto the porch, and aimed the beam at the barn. The light hit the doors just as they went still, and that's when I heard it. Slow, heavy breathing. Deep enough that I could feel it in my chest. It wasn't coming from outside the barn. It was coming from inside. Back inside the house, I sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the journal. Something about it felt heavier now, like the leather cover was holding more than just paper. I flipped to the back and my fingernail caught on something under the last page. There was a strip of tape holding a small rusted key in place. It wasn't labeled, but I had a pretty good guess where it belonged. You know when you have a key in your hand and you know it's about to open something that's going to change everything? That's exactly how I felt, standing in front of the barn. The key from the back of the journal was cold, heavier than it looked. The barn loomed in front of me like it had been waiting. I'd walked past it every day since I got here, pretending not to notice the claw marks on the inside of the door, the faint metallic smell that would hit when the wind shifted. Today, no more pretending. I slid the key into the rusty padlock. It resisted at first, like the lock itself didn't want to give in. When it finally turned, the click was louder than it should have been. The moment I cracked the door open, the smell hit me. It wasn't just rot, it was worse. Imagine wet soil after rain, but mixed with something sweet and foul, like fruit left too long in the sun, or a dead animal buried shallow. The light barely reached inside. Dust motes swirled in the air, each one feeling like it was floating too slowly. And then I saw them. Tools, hanging from the rafters. Bone-handled tools, their edges blackened, as if they'd been in fire. Some looked like knives, others like hooks, but none matched anything I'd seen in a normal barn. They were too specific. Chains lay coiled on the floor, but not in neat piles. More like they'd been dropped in a hurry. A few were bolted to the ground, and on two of them I saw dried, dark brown stains. I didn't want to think about what they were. I moved deeper in. Against the far wall sat 3 massive wooden crates. Each had deep scratches on the inside. Not random, not animal. These were desperate. The kind of scratches someone would make if they thought they could claw their way out. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to open them, so I didn't. Instead, I noticed the uneven floorboards near the back. Kneeling, I ran my hand over them. One was looser than the rest. It took some effort, but I pried it up. Beneath was a hidden compartment. Inside, a bundle of letters tied together with twine, yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was sharp, almost angry. They were between my great-uncle and someone who signed only as the shepherd. Every letter was about the bargain. The bargain must be honored. The watchers grow restless. And then, in one, near the end, the final harvest comes this year. I didn't understand what it meant, but the pit in my stomach told me I should. When I stepped outside, I saw something half buried behind the barn. It looked like a mound of dirt, but too uniform. I dug. My hands shook the whole time. A shallow grave. Inside, was a body, perfectly preserved, like it hadn't been buried for decades. The skin was pale, almost waxy. And the eyes, no. There were no eyes. Just smooth, sunken hollows. I dropped the shovel and stumbled back until I nearly tripped over a root. I didn't know if I was breathing. That night, I locked every door, every window. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from my bedroom window. My second-story bedroom window. I froze in bed, my chest tight. The sound went on for what felt like forever. Finally, I worked up the nerve to glance toward it. There was nothing there. But the glass, it was fogged from the outside, like something had been breathing against it. It started with the footsteps, not fast. Panicked ones, like someone running from trouble. Not heavy stomps like an intruder breaking in. No, these were slow, deliberate pacing, like whatever it was, wanted me to know they were there. The first night I heard them, I was lying in bed with the journal on my chest. I'd been rereading the last few feverish entries, trying to decode the parts about feeding them and keeping the watchers satisfied. It was past midnight when the sound drifted in through the cracked window. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps on the gravel drive circling the house. At first, I thought it might be the wind pushing a loose shutter or maybe an animal. But then I noticed the pauses every few steps. Whoever it was would stop, stand still for a beat, then start moving again. They made a slow lap around the house. 1, 2, 3 times, and then silence. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation can do weird things to your brain, and I'd been running on too much coffee and not enough rest ever since I got here. But then I went outside. There were footprints in the dew, long, narrow prints with a stride too long for a normal person. They circled the farmhouse in a perfect loop. No tracks leading toward the road, no tracks leading away. Just there. By the second night, it escalated. I was in the kitchen eating a can of cold ravioli. The stove still wouldn't work. When I noticed something through the window over the sink. At the very edge of the field, where the corn ended and the woods began, a figure was standing perfectly still. It was tall, too tall, and its shoulders sloped unnaturally, like they didn't belong to the rest of its body. I couldn't see its face, just a black, elongated shape. I thought maybe it was a scarecrow, but then I realized the farm never had any, and scarecrows don't turn their head slightly when you look at them. I pulled the curtain shut and tried to ignore it, but when I checked again an hour later, it was still there. Same spot, same posture, watching. It stayed there until night fell. The third day was worse. I was headed into town for supplies when I saw someone I hadn't noticed before, a local man I'd never met, standing at the edge of the road, leaning on a rusted bicycle. He had the leathery skin of someone who'd spent his whole life under the sun, and his eyes were a pale, cloudy blue. When I passed him, he gave a quick nod, then glanced toward the woods. Without saying a word, he started walking in. I don't know why I followed him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was because I felt like he wanted me to. But I left the truck at the roadside and trailed him down a narrow path that twisted between the trees. We walked for maybe 15 minutes before the trees opened into a clearing. That's when I saw them. A dozen figures knelt in a rough circle around a pit in the ground. Each wore a hooded cloak, faces hidden. In the pit, something moved. At first, I thought it was an animal. It was chained to a metal post in the center, thrashing against the restraints. But then it made a sound, not a roar, not a growl. Something in between, wet and guttural, and under that sound, words. They weren't words I recognized, but my brain kept almost understanding them, like a half-remembered language from a dream. One of the kneeling figures leaned forward, holding what looked like a bundle of meat, and tossed it into the pit. The thing snatched it up with a speed that made my stomach turn. I must have stepped on a twig or shifted wrong, because the next thing I knew, every hooded head turned toward me in perfect unison. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots caught my feet, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I could hear them not shouting, not calling, just moving. Fast. I broke through the tree line and sprinted across the field toward the farmhouse. The figure at the field's edge was gone now, but I swear I felt something running parallel to me in the corn. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and shoved the heavy kitchen table against it for good measure. My chest was heaving and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone, trying to call. Well, I didn't even know who to call. Night came. I hadn't moved from the chair by the door when I heard it, a soft knock. Not pounding, just tap, tap, tap. Every muscle in my body locked up. I wanted to pretend I wasn't home, but then a voice came through the wood. It's me. It was a lawyer. I hesitated, then slid the table aside and cracked the door open. He was standing there, pale as a ghost, his suit rumpled and his tie loose. His eyes darted over his shoulder toward the dark field. "They're ready for you now," he said. His voice wasn't calm. It wasn't threatening. It was resigned, like he already knew there was no point in running. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. The knocking on the door, the voice of the lawyer at the threshold, it kept replaying in my head, looping like some horrible record. I kept picturing the field, the figure at its edge, the chanting in the clearing, and the thing in the pit. By the time I finally faced him, the lawyer in the kitchen, pale and trembling, I realized he wasn't there to help me. Or maybe he was. I couldn't tell anymore. "They're part of it," he said, voice barely a whisper. "I was part of it, but I wanted out." "You?" I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You dragged me into this." He shook his head. "I didn't know they'd pick you. You're the heir, and there is a way to end it, the pact, but it will cost blood." My stomach nodded. "Blood? Whose blood?" He didn't answer. He just grabbed a lantern and motioned me toward the barn. The key had already opened it once. Now we used it together, stepping inside. The smell hit immediately. Wet soil, rot, old decay worse than the last time. My flashlight bounced over the bone-handled tools, the chains, the crates, and then we found it. A trapdoor in the back corner, hidden under a loose floorboard. He pushed it open, revealing a tunnel descending straight into darkness. I swallowed hard and followed him down the narrow staircase. The walls were lined with bones, human, animal, some that didn't belong to any species I recognized. The air was cold, damp, and carried a metallic tang that burned my nose. I wanted to turn back. I needed to, but something stronger than fear propelled me forward. We reached a chamber at the bottom, lit by torches that seemed to appear from nowhere, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. And there it was, the shepherd. It didn't move like a human. Its limbs twisted at angles that shouldn't have been possible. Skin was stretched thin over knobby, elongated bones. Its head tilted just slightly, as if amused, and its smile, far too wide, split the shadows like a crescent moon. Eyes deep-set, glinting with some ancient malice. I could feel my throat tighten just by looking at it. Behind us, we heard chanting. The cult had arrived. Hooded figures formed a circle around the chamber, voices low and synchronized, words alien and yet recognizable, invoking the harvest and calling the heir forward. "They're ready," the lawyer whispered, shivering. "It's your turn. The heir's offering." I didn't hesitate. There was no other way, not if I wanted to survive. I grabbed a lantern, the lawyer holding the other, and threw both into the torches lining the walls. Flames licked up instantly. Hungry and bright, screams guttural, inhuman echoed through the chamber as the cult scattered. Shadows twisted and shrieked, moving in ways that made my stomach convulse. The shepherd screamed too, a sound that wasn't human, 1,000 voices layered in one shrill, horrifying wail. The bones on the walls rattled as if alive, but the fire spread faster, devouring everything. The lawyer shouted something behind me, but I couldn't hear over the crackling inferno. I ran. There was the well shaft, the one I had avoided, the one my great-uncle warned me about. I jumped. Cold water enveloped me instantly. I swallowed half of it, flailed, and managed to pull myself up the old wooden ladder on the side. I emerged into the night, coughing, shivering, covered in grime and water. The barn behind me was already engulfed in flames. Smoke curled into the sky, thick and acrid. I didn't look back. By the time the police arrived the next morning, the farmhouse and barn were nothing but charred timber and smoldering ash. I tried to explain. They didn't believe me. Who would? An abandoned farm, a burned-down barn, and some story about an ancient thing in the woods and a cult. I left Blackwood County that same day. I didn't stop until I found a small apartment in a city that had never heard of my great-uncle, the farm, or the shepherd. I thought it was over, but horror doesn't stay buried. Night after night, I lie awake, the apartment silent except for the occasional creak of the building settling, and then it starts. Scratch, 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 just like the walls of the farm, just like the window on the second floor. My heart hammers, my hands go cold, and for a moment I feel like I can hear the faint, wet breath of something watching, waiting. I tell myself it's the apartment settling. I tell myself it's just the building. But deep down, I know it's not. The shepherd, the watchers, the pact, whatever it was, it didn't end. It followed me. And I think somehow it always will. The story ends there with me alive, yes, but haunted, watched,